Present to you a bit about what I do and an insight to what goes on behind the images. I'm a sailing photographer from a sailing family, and I've been doing this for about 6-7 years as a professional, working in the industry. I work in many different places and follow the sailing season around the world. I either work for a client, which might be an event, a team, or a brand, and that's sort of what makes up the basis of what takes me to these different places and the stories behind the images. In this presentation, I'll give a bit of an explanation as to some of my favorite images and a bit of the background to them at the same time. So without further ado, is sailing art? That's always a very poignant question when doing this job. Nowadays, we have these influences of social media which influence very much the type of images that we see, and these influence sort of the colors, the dynamics, the action, because we want images that grab your attention from your screen whilst you're scrolling through. And so how do we think of different ways to make images engaging? That's a very new thing that we have to work with, and that interests me a lot because I like to create a dynamic image and have something that looks a bit different. For myself, there's a few different specifications as outlined here. I think of these when I select my images, when I'm taking them. We as photographers, we look to create an image that has many layers to it. Images that speak to you so that you can relate to what's going on in the image. You can see yourself in these situations, or you can link stories from things you have done to what is going on. Images that have more depth to them so that you look at them a second time and you see more things going on. And at the same time, capturing the raw nature of the sport, whether it's the action like this downwind shot here with lots of wind and waves, or the water which is around us and the wind. And lastly, the human element I find quite important, to showcasing that we are involved in the sport, and it's very key to us and makes us feel a feeling for the sport. Yeah. So in my bag, I travel.
Just a few things.
Yes, I travel a lot with a backpack, no bigger than any normal backpack, and in it I will have all of these items. I have 2 cameras with me, one that I mainly use, and then one that I have in case things go wrong and I need a backup. And on this particular camera just here, I will shoot both photo and video on the same thing. Yes. Sorry. And these cameras are DSLRs. Who here is a photographer who has an interest in photography? Right. Okay. So it's a good amount. Yeah. And some of you then will be familiar with mirrorless cameras, I imagine. As you might not be able to see here, but these are Nikon D850 cameras. I'm a Nikon user. And at the moment, I still prefer using digital cameras as opposed to mirrorless. Maybe because it's sport photography, but the mirrorless cameras have no shutter in them. So with this, we have an electronic viewfinder, very different to film SLR. And for me, I still prefer using this technology, but it is something that is becoming very prominent in photography. And a lot of people are transitioning to mirrorless systems. With the cameras, I have a full range of lenses here, all the way from a very wide lens of 17 millimeters here in the middle, all the way through to the large telephoto lens, which for myself is a 500mm lens. And then there are additional pieces, such as, of course, my laptop, which is my workstation, and VHF, a multi-tool, all those useful little things that just help in a sailing situation. And ironically, at the same time, whilst my camera bag consists of this all the time, my clothes bag is also the same because I end up living out of a suitcase essentially. What is missing from this photo? A drone. So This photo is a little bit older, and there's no drone in this photo, but it is something I'm using a lot. And I thought I might showcase this by just showing a little highlight reel of drone content. And it should show some of the different projects I work with, some of the different places that we like to see.
These are all done with the drone that you were running?
Yes, these are all taken by myself on the drone. The majority of them I'm actually on board the vessel itself. And then there's a few cases like the Dragons here where I'm in a chase mode.
Which drone are you using?
I have two. I have both are DJIs. One's a Phantom 4, and then one is a Mavic Zoom. And something I'd like to do is do more with the zoom lens to try and have a drone that is a bit less wide angle. Because at the moment with the wide angle lenses we end up flying very close to the boats to make it look more engaging.
That was leading that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many drones have crashed?
Interestingly, I crashed one right at the start when I was starting out with drones, and then 3 years later, no issues, and I crashed one about 2 weeks ago. Yes, but as you can see, it's a vast range of different boats, all the way from Dragons to the very current Cape 31s that are racing in the Solent, and then a shot before you might have seen there of the Leopard, the 100 footer. This is a mini transat boat, 6.5 meters long, and then again another maxi, which is 100 feet in length.
So what sort of camera is on?
On the drone is it's like a GoPro, if you liken it to that, sort of very wide angle, small, and it's stabilized, yes, lightweight, so we increase the flight time. But the stabilization helps, and we get these very dynamic looking kind of photos. This here is in the Caribbean earlier this year, actually. And and then the Fastnet race was another one from this year.
What sort of maximum wind speed can the drone handle before?
Very good question. This weekend we were flying the drone in about 25 knots of wind. Going downwind, which the majority of these photos are, it's a lot easier because you don't have an apparent wind against you. So that's, you can sort of get away up to 35 knots flying downwind for the most part. Of course, you need a bit of confidence to do that.
I suppose the drone recovery is a key to all of this.
Yes. Yeah. The drone recovery takes a bit of practice, and we'll be on a boat like this, and I will be at the back flying, and often I'll ask the skipper of the boat to catch the boat. To catch the drone itself. But the drone has legs, and that makes it easier.
That's the Phantom, right?
Yes, and then on the Mavic, you can buy third-party accessories. So someone produces little legs that clip onto it, which I would recommend as a tool for catching it.
How much flight time approximately you would get?
Overall 25 minutes, but in reality 15-20 minutes, because the last percentage is always... Yes, yeah.
Do you ever,
problematic?
have you ever received the glitch where it's fly home and then obviously home is that way?
Yes, so one of the major issues with flying drones on board the boat is that the drone likes to take a reference to where it took off from, and then obviously the boat itself is moving away from that point. So we get a challenge. We override the settings basically. We take away the maximum distance from the home point, and then able to fly for that range. But if there is an issue, then coming into land, you lose the drone.
I was going to say I have a drone, but I'm too scared to fly it.
But that gives,
my pilot legs.
that's a bit of an oversight as to some of the different projects and aspects that I end up working in. So I thought we'd go into just sort of some of my standout photos that I quite like, and then talk a bit about the story behind them. Does anyone know what fleet of boats this is? what event this is?
Volvo.
Correct, yes. This is the Volvo Ocean Race.
Did you read that off the top of the sound?
Yes. And back in 2017-18, this event is a round the world competition. The boats, Volvo 65, sail about 8 legs around the world, stopping in different countries. This one here, in this case, is Newport, Rhode Island, which is iconically pictured here with the bridge from Rhode Island to Jamestown. And the boats here in this situation, they have arrived in Newport, stayed for a few weeks, and then this is actually the restart of the race when they leave Newport and sail back to Europe, where they do a small parade around the harbour. And so they start, I'm trying to remember the geography, the south end of Newport Harbour, and then sail north under the bridge before heading south again and out through the heads into the Atlantic Ocean. For me, this image is kind of a standout. At the time, where you can see there's another chase boat just here in the corner, and we were following along the front of the fleet, and I asked the driver to slow down and let the boats run away from us, with the hope that we might get this lineup, which at the time is frame rent, well, sort of in the right moment with the bridge, denoting the iconic landmarks of Newport. Next, we'll look at this boat. This is called Scorpios. From this photo, it might be a bit hard to gauge the size, but this boat is actually 125 feet in length. And it's a fully carbon fibre build, all-out race boat. Slightly controversial with a Russian owner. So at the moment, it's in Barcelona, not being sailed, unfortunately. But at the time, this was during Fastnet in 2021. And so, I don't know, did anyone here do the Fastnet race? Very good. You might remember then it was very windy and wavy. I think at this point there was about 30 knots of wind, very big sea state, and there's an element of that you can see in the image with the spray coming over the side of the boat, despite the freeboard of the boat being in excess of 2 meters.
But how fast would it be going?
Upwind here at the moment, probably around 13 knots upwind. Yeah. These big boats, they sail, 13 knots doesn't sound a lot, but to sail 13 knots upwind and have a very good heading is of course a very rare thing, so it's quite impressive. And then beating into a big swell, the boat emulates its power with massive sail area, water ballast and canting keel.
So here would you be quite far away and then using quite a big lens to zoom in?
At this point,
But it's coming very quickly at you.
Well, there's 2 factors there. We were at Hurst Castle here. Between Hurst and the Needles, the waves, the wind and the tide produce these very big overfalls. And so they're very hard to manage whilst being in the rib and trying to stay safe at the same time as keeping equipment dry. So we're actually sitting just inside of the tide line at Hurst Castle. And beyond us, the waves got even bigger, but even here they were very big. And as you say, a relatively telephoto lens, yes, and approaching from windward. Next, I'll just look at sort of the onboard aspect. So half the time I'll be in a rib like this, photographing the boats, and the other half I will be actually on board the boat itself. In this case, this is a Volvo 70, a former boat called Camper, and we are racing in the Rolex Middle Sea Race back in 2021 as well. These boats are very wet, a lot of water comes over the deck. That's kind of by design, and as you can see, this boat has, well, it's not the easiest thing to see, but there are pedestals here for grinding to actuate the winches. At this time, we were going into the second morning of the race. The race goes around Sicily in Italy. And this photo was taken at around 5 a.m. in the morning, just when the sun is coming up. At this time of day, you have both the sun and then the light is quite blue. It's the same in the evening time. There's that twilight period. And that's quite a nice thing to capture because it's a bit softer than absolute darkness. Unfortunately, the race didn't go very well for us because we broke the boom later that day. We had a pretty fun day, sailing not too fast. We maxed out maybe 24 knots, which we had other competitors going faster, but we were averaging 22 knots for 12 hours, and that's quite an enduring time. And when you're going that sort of speed, the whole boat is shuddering and going downwind, slamming into waves all the time. So it's quite a hard place to live on board the boat when you're in those situations.
Are you purely doing photography, or are you having to do other things as a crew member as well?
I purely do photography, so I find myself in a position going on board boats for that purpose, and very rarely sailing anymore, which is it's a little bit odd, but that's the way it's gone, and I'm happy in that situation as well. Yeah.
What's all the patterns in the sky? What's about that?
Sorry, this up here?
Yes.
So I'm sitting in the companionway of the vessel, and there's a roof over my head. And this is actually a wave coming over that roof.
Oh!
Yes. So we've got a slightly slower shutter speed here, and that's exaggerating the motion of the water, where the water's coming sort of. I'm facing aft, and the water's coming over the roof, and you can see the water on the deck just here to the left.
How do you manage to keep your equipment dry on a boat like that? Because that's like not just outside; everything just gets wet.
Well, that's why I'm sitting inside.
Photograph and hide the kit.
Yes, no, some people use housings for their cameras. Everyone has a different preference. Myself, I don't use housings. I sometimes just have an oversized jacket, to be honest, and tuck it inside a jacket. That's quite effective. But being smart about it, knowing what you're working with, is very much part of protecting the equipment. And then,
typically, about how many frames would you actually take to get that one there?
in this sequence, probably dealing with anywhere between 50 and 100 frames. But of course, there's a time window because the sun's coming up.
Yes.
So there's a balance.
Take.
Yeah, and then out of those, because there's a slower shutter speed, was trying to find one in that sequence that was sharp enough to use. Continuing with the onboard theme, some of you might recognize this boat. It's called Kamaji. It's 100 feet long, again. Very wide boat. If anyone, any guesses as to how wide this boat is? 30 meters in length, 8 meters in beam, which yes, is almost as long as some pleasure cruisers. Yes.
It's like a saucer.
They call it the aircraft carrier. That's what they call it. And the boat is designed for off-the-wind sailing, downwind, which in this case we're doing. This is in Antigua 2 years ago at the Caribbean 600. And the boat's very famous because it holds the transatlantic record from Newport to Lizard Point, which was a record that stood for over 100 years until, well, originally until Mary Char beat it, and then these guys managed to shave some time off that. What's amazing about the boat is just the sheer scale of everything, the length, the breadth. There's a dagger board just to the right of the mast, which is towering into the sky. And then
two, isn't it?
Correct, yes. And then this array of ropes going into the winches in the deck. Slightly different. Going back to the point of sailing art, well, I like to try and adopt different aspects of photography. So I have a keen interest in urban photography and those sorts of styles. So sailing, as you might have mentioned, sorry, Ian, like Beacon or other photographers like that, traditional. So I like to try and bring in aspects where using the geometry of, in this case, architecture around us, or you'll see in the next photo, there's a slightly different aspect again, just to try and paint the images slightly different. In this one, this is a dinghy being rigged on land, and then in Spain, there was this structure on land for no obvious reason, but it presents quite an interesting geometrical image, yes. And I put the image in black and white as well to accentuate the shadows and just sort of try and draw the eye in to look deeper into the image to find different aspects of what is going on. Yes, this image was captured actually 3 weeks ago in Barcelona during the TP52 World Championships. It is a technique that relies very much on chance. We have the bowman, Juanpa, he's up on the bow. The sun is behind him. It's the last race of the day, so the light is lower in the sky, and it's backlighting him through the kite, creating a shadow. In this particular instance, the kite is hanging under the deck, so the effect is that he's almost levitating, which is quite fun.
Is that posed, or is that...
And that's relying on him just doing his normal job, yes, so
Right.
no posing or anything.
Right.
So why is there two shadows?
The one further aft,
Yeah.
that's another crew member.
Oh, I was going to say one.
Yeah, and I think there's a head of another
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
It's just got his hand hanging down the same
Yes.
way.
Yeah.
So, gorillas on the floor then.
Yeah.
And it relies partly on luck, but also just the engineering behind the photo of thinking, where is the line, where do we want to position the chase boat at the time, so that we can line up these two factors to create this effect.
So the chase boat you're on is under your full command, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Often,
because
yes.
that's the challenge I had, because it's also a guide boat, so you can't always direct them to do what you want. Basically.
Yes. Often though, we will be in a press boat with other photographers. I like this. It's a good challenge to try and come up with something different from the other people you're with. So yeah, often.
You don't have a regular driver then on a rib, or...
Sorry.
You don't have a regular driver on a rib then?
For press boats, we'll have a driver. Yes.
No, but a regular one, or the...
No. Usually, yeah. That's a challenge as well. It's trying to work with
Yeah.
someone you've never met before. No. Very rarely we ask for someone else. Then, of course, as I mentioned before, the human element. This is actually the same boat where that morning photo was taken, and that's the position I was in taking that photo looking aft. In this situation, we flip places, and this is our bowman, Pancho. I find this image very sort of emotive. It's very sharp looking. Yeah. It's
Front is coming
yeah, and he's under the roof. We have a washboard, a lower washboard pulled across, and then another washboard here. So you end up with try to waterproof the boat as much as possible. But he's obviously looking forward to the next time he goes on the bow in 20 knots of wind and big sea stains. There's two sides to the human aspect with emotion. There's like this, and then we have elation. So this is Libby Greenhalgh. She's a famous navigator, and in the Volvo Ocean race, she was sailing on board Scallywag, and on this leg they arrived into Auckland after sailing for some 20 days, arriving in second place. And as soon as you come in on the dock, of course the press come and interview you, we want the photos, and someone is interviewing Libby, and I think you can sort of see maybe a realization of what they have achieved in that. And again, with the black and white, it brings out some different aspects to what the image might look like. Yeah. Moving on from portraits. there is sailing in relation to where we are. We operate in nature, and I find it quite interesting trying to capture the sailing against the backdrop. So in this place we are in Lanzarote, which is defined by these large mountains with a sort of ash colour to the land from all the volcanic activity. Beneath is Comanche, again the 100-footer, and the boat being 100 feet has a mast tall enough to make the image work. With any boat smaller, I think the image would lack a bit of purpose, but here you get a sense of scale from the boat being 30 meters long and then a very large backdrop in the background.
Or you have to move closer.
Yes. Again, any ideas where this might be?
Croatia?
It is Italy.
It's Positano.
This is Lake Garda, which, like Positano, very colourful, vibrant houses. Each year in Garda, well, there's a whole host of different events in Garda. I often go to one called Foiling Week, which is a week-long event with various different boats that hydrofoil above the water. This is not hydrofoiling. At the same time as that event, there is a race which I believe is called, it's called the Garda 1000, and it's a race around the lake with a group of ORC boats. This one here is called a Brenta yacht. And to make this photo the way I wanted to, I trekked up. Garda's very sheer and in the hillsides, so I trekked up one of the hills for about 2 hours with my camera bag, carrying about 15 kilos of glass and metal in the lenses.
No wonder you're so skinny.
And then found this position that I was happy with, which had both the houses, the colours of these yellow houses, and then a sort of church bell tower, which adds a different aspect to the photo. And then sat there and waited in the hope that the boats would come close to land, close enough to make a photo like this stand out and work in that sense. Yes, painting sailing against the backdrops of where we are is, I find, quite interesting. At the same time, we are sailing in nature. We're sailing in the water where the whales swim, with the wind that the birds fly on as well. This bird is in the Caribbean. It's during the Caribbean 600. We're sailing for 600 miles offshore. And this bird just came and sat alongside us for about 15 minutes, maybe riding off the wind coming off our mainsail, or maybe not. I might be completely wrong. And I quite like this image because the bird, to me at least, looks kind of prehistoric in some ways, particularly in how the beak and the head have a sort of bone-like quality to it, and then the shape of the wing, which to me emulates a bit of a tetradactyl or something like that. To be honest, I haven't been able to find out what type of bird it is yet.
A frigate bird?
I'm not sure. The defining thing would be, in the Caribbean at least, the feet, but
Can't see them.
we can't see the feet, so that's unfortunate. Yes. And then other sides, of course, are animals that swim in the water that we sail in. Whales and dolphins are all around us.
Is that colour just the sun?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, this is in Tromsø, up in the Arctic Circle.
Yes.
Has anyone been in the Arctic Circle?
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Nice. Yes, we're above 66 degrees north, well in the Arctic Circle, still in Norway. And this was a trip we did last year, a slight expedition to see wildlife on board a 62-foot boat called Keelak, which is an aluminium purpose-built yacht to go in these regions. And I'll actually show a video clip to sort of end the presentation later on that shows a bit of what we saw on that particular voyage.
To what extent do you process your images afterwards? I mean, clearly it's advantageous to get them right first time, but I mean, just looking at the bright yellow in this, has it been tweaked at all?
Personally, I like to keep the images quite real.
Yeah.
I think there is, it adds credibility to the image, having it the way you see it in real life. Social media drives different aspects to make images a bit more saturated or sharper, let's say. But for the most part, I'll find a balance somewhere in between, and I prefer to get it right out of the camera the first time as opposed to having to edit it a lot. So in this situation, we're in Tromsø in October time, nearly a year ago actually, and in that time of year the daylight is very short, so we're having about 3.5 hours of daylight per day. On a good day when it's not overcast, that is. Which kind of puts us in a twilight period for most of the day, with a very slow sunrise because we're so far north, and then a very slow sunset as well, which is why the light is what it is, and it's going down onto the mountains. It's a bit more yellow on this screen, I will admit, than what I have on my screen, but yeah, that's
So
sometimes
do
how
you
it
use
goes.
filters on your camera before you take a picture like that then, or do you?
I do not, no.
No.
No, this is upping the ISO settings quite a bit to get more light in, and then getting a faster shutter speed. Because at the time, the darkness, it's not very dark, but the shadows on the water, there's actually not a lot of light going on in that image.
You can use a polarizing filter.
Sorry, do
A polarizing filter.
I? Sometimes, occasionally, but not so often, to be honest. No.
Do you tend to be aperture priority?
I do, yes. Yeah. On this occasion, we followed this pod of orcas for about 2.5 hours on that day. There were 17 orcas in the pod, and we had the privilege to follow them, watch them hunting, relax between hunting, and then go hunting again. And despite being in the Arctic Circle, Norway is very developed in infrastructure, so we were able to send photos on WhatsApp directly off the boat, or one of the people with us did a FaceTime to his wife at the time. And then back to sailing. Sometimes things don't always go right. This here is a foiling moth dinghy. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. Foiling is right now very current, but it has been around for a long time, and the moth dinghy in particular has been around for the last 15 years. A dinghy that hydrofoils above the water, essentially. And when you foil, you reduce your drag on the boat significantly, so your speed is increased. These boats will do 20 knots upwind, and then potentially 30 knots downwind. The downside, which we can see here, is downwind. If you foil too high, the foil can pierce the water, and the boat can get ventilation on the foil and crash. And in this case, the person has fallen off the foil in quite a big sea state, and you get this deacceleration where the person is flung forwards, in this case creating a very big splash around him. Again, this is in Lake Garda, taken earlier this year.
Is that kind of shadow on the sort of mid-left side? Is that a person?
Yes, sir. Yes, this is his head, his legs, which could be.
Were you expecting that to happen, or were you just?
Well, the thing with capturing, like the image before as well, things that don't go to plan. Actually, no, sorry, that's the things not going to plan. It happens, but you have to have some anticipation that it could happen, and that involves being in the right place at the right time, which is building on experience and having an inclination as to what might happen. So here we are at the bottom mark, there's a gate, and usually with this class, when they come into the bottom mark in good winds, there is potential for these things to happen as they push the boats a bit harder and
So it's a good picture for you, but not a good thing for the crew.
kind of, yes.
You acted rescue boat as well.
Oh no. Very, very rarely. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just a further example of something not going right. 2019 TP52s in the World Championships. This is a team called Provenza. With a mast break, they came around the bottom mark and going back upwind, there was an issue they figured out in the end with the D1 shroud, and it broke, and the rig was not in column, so it broke in the middle of the World Championships for the class. This was on the first day of racing. On the practice day, they had won the practice race, and in this class, you tend not to go through the finish line if you're winning, because it's a connotation for bad luck, which they did, and this is the result. So superstition does exist in sailing, absolutely. They then spent 3 days shipping their spare mast from Valencia to Palma, where we were, and they were able to get the new mast in and race the last 2 days of the regatta, finishing still in mid-fleet, which is quite an impressive achievement. Where do all of these photos end up? As I said in the beginning, I sometimes work for an event, a client, a brand, or a team. Some examples: one of my clients is Helly Hansen. We do a shoot annually. This is Pip Hare, an English female offshore sailor who sails by herself. And this is quite a big ad campaign that we did last year on board her Imoca, sailing out of Portland. And some photos like this one, and there's another one that ended up being used for marketing in different Helly Hansen stores and on product catalogues. In fact, I actually just went into, I was in the bar before and I saw a Yachting World magazine, and a little flick through, and
You spotted one of yours.
I did indeed. Which I had earmarked, but I've now lost it. Yes, just here with the Cape 31s from earlier this year. So the work ends up in many different places. Of course, very much all over social media. That's one of the bigger outputs of content nowadays. These classes want to promote themselves and have new owners in the class. So yeah, the content ends up going to different people and it's out there. Yeah. We also produce a calendar every year, and some of the photos end up going into that. So I have half of the photos in this calendar in our Tomlinson brand. And that's sort of our reflection of the most interesting photos taken in that year, going onto your wall, basically. I said I'd finish up with this piece about sailing in Tromsø, seeing nature. So here's a video clip that we made as a summary of that trip, involving drone and a mixture of handheld photography. So we had a mixture of orca whales. That's where you see the extent of the pod, humpback whales, and then we also saw one or two fin whales. In the time of year in October, the whales migrate north. That's the fin whale, for example, and they migrate north to Tromsø to feed, essentially, and raise the calves. And here, a pack of humpback whales. That's the boat we're on as well, sorry. The pack of whales will drive the krill into a fjord and basically bunch them up in the hunting method to then have them in a smaller area and consume them in that way. This is using drone again. Well, often when sailing, water is an issue, getting on the lens, so just have a sort of piece of kitchen towel in our pocket and then clean the lens if it gets...
If it's on a drone, you have to get the drone back.
Yes.
Get it right out. So if the whale is blowing onto your drone.
And that was something that I hadn't anticipated at the time, like flying above the orca whale, is that the spout does put some moisture onto the drone lens. And with the drone, from the aerial view, you see the wingspan of the whales as well, which, when you look across the water, is a different perspective. Yeah, and that's what I prepared to present to you today. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, James. There's a phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, which you're familiar with. You've more than proved that tonight. And thank you very much indeed for giving us such a fantastic insight into all the superb work that you do. We're very grateful.
Thank you.
You've been very kind and taken questions during the course of the presentation. Are there any further questions that you would like to ask?
What would your advice be for absolute beginners who are new to sailing and wanting to get good photographs? What would we need? And what that's cost effective, that's not going to be all of the kit. We're working maybe with mobile phones or things like that. What would you advise?
Sure. We usually say the best camera is the one you have on you, which nowadays, of course, is your phone for the majority of the time. Modern iPhones or indeed Android phones are very good in quality. So you can capture stuff on your phone, for instance, and then if you wanted to take it a step further, you might take it into a software on a laptop and have a look at how it looks and correct it slightly. But in more simple terms, just getting a nice image might be just, I find the lenses can get smudged a bit, so I'd often clean them off very quickly before taking a photo. Or keeping the horizon level, that's also one of the things that a lot of these images use. But then going up a stage into actual cameras and such, yeah, there's a whole range of DSLRs you can use. You don't have to use full frame, there's micro four thirds, there's APS-C, smaller sensor cameras. And they equally produce good quality.
How about the Tough series from Olympus?
And then yes, there's compact cameras. And, compact cameras with, again, smaller sensors, but they produce nice quality. And some of those compact cameras are tough, where different brands, of course, but Olympus or Nikon or Canon all make these little tough cameras that are waterproof, shockproof, and they're good to use, absolutely. Yeah.
Nicola, you have a question.
Yes, actually it's rather similar in a way. We have a annual competition and deadline, by the way, is the 1st of November. Anyway, I was going. I really like the way your pictures tell stories, and I also really respect the amount of preparation you're putting in to being there at the right time. So I suppose my question is about tips for being there at the right time, which might help other people make even better photos.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sort of from being on board or being on a chase boat such as that?
Well, these are going to be people on board.
Yes. Okay. Yes, being on board, there's a few points of time in the day that we prefer to shoot. Say a sunset or a sunrise is very nice because the light is softer, but also going into the evening time. In the middle of the day, the sun is overhead, quite sharp and bright, and then in the afternoon, the later afternoon, the light becomes softer, which can be nice. Looking for, again, faces. I like details, so someone holding a rope or something, to me that's quite interesting. Something as simple as that. Or just a wider piece maybe to look at how things are on the boat with people helming or trimming a winch, might be aspects like that. But often good light is what makes the difference. If it's grey, then everything sort of looks sort of one shade, so that makes a big difference. Elements of that.
Oh yes. So has any of your camera gear fell into the water before?
Yes, I lost. I drove. I've lost 2 drones. And then in 2019, I lost one of my cameras. There's a particular technique where we try and clamp it to the boat and use a slower shutter speed, which freezes the boat, but the water becomes a motion going past the camera. And on that occasion, the clamp didn't work and the camera fell in. So it can happen, unfortunately. And then, yes, you're into insurance and all the rest of it.
Well, James, thank you again.
Where do you see your career going from now? With all these changes,
shall we
and the advancement?
Perhaps James will talk to us a little bit about that over dinner rather than now. But thank you again very much indeed. How you're joining us for dinner tonight, and I'm sure that the other things that perhaps you will be kind enough to add. And we're really very, very grateful to you, and I'm also very impressed with your work. Very well done.
Thank you.
Dinner will be at 8:15 in 13 minutes.